Live from the parking lot of Farmers Market in beautiful, well, in Sacramento, California.
Oh, that was naughty, Lon.
Actually, this part of Sacramento, even our neighborhood is beautiful. It really is. So,
just driving between them is...
yes. And happy Halloween, everybody. We watched the Democracy Now! News show this morning, and we know what horror is. And I can't imagine anything more horrifying than the news. So at the moment, but we're here and we've got a shop, and this life goes on. And I'm sitting next to the most beautiful woman.
Oh God, Lon, lay off. Lon wants something.
And here she is. Hang on. There she is.
He's not letting me see myself first this morning. Happy Halloween. I actually decided to write notes today because I'm on a mission.
She's on a mission from God.
Oh no, I'm always on a mission from God. That's so is everyone. It's also the Day of the Dead and All Souls Day tomorrow, and it's a time when people remember their relatives and friends who have left this mortal coil, and they want, supposedly it's if you remember them, they stay with you. But the thing is, they never left.
You silly, they never.
It's to remind yourself that they're still part of your life, and to remind, and I doubt that anyway, which is a good thing because anyway, it's a wonderful thought to remember your relatives and friends, and that we're all never get separated, because you just can't achieve enlightenment or illumination or self-realization or union with God alone. No, not that sadhus don't go into caves and hermits don't go into mountains and holy men go into the desert, but they're not going to be alone. They're going to get away from the ego distractions that keep them from feeling that they are alone and separate. They're going for a union thing. They're not going to be away from people and away from them. They're just going from the distractions that keep them from feeling like they're connected to everybody and to God. So you can't achieve the illumination and the self-realization and the union alone. You have to, if you want those things, you have to be able to, and then they come back, and what do? They teach people, or they try to, and then their disciples screw it all up, and you know how that goes. But they try to teach people because it's like, if you want something, you have to give it away. If you want to get something, the only way to give, that's because we're connected. That's the obvious reason, is because if you want something, you have to give it. It's just wait. So, and watching the news, okay? Because let's face it, if you want human rights, you have to give them to other people. You're not gonna. And we're watching a live streaming of genocide. Well, no one dares to say or do anything. And it's going to bring about unfortunate payback. So, at least in our hearts, and with our mediocre voices, talk to someone else about it. That if you want peace, and if you don't achieve peace and security by killing other people. It just has never worked ever. If you know any history, don't forget history. It's at least a lesson. History is not so you can remember to say I need to get revenge on somebody. It's to tell you that never ever has worked. Don't see the wrong side of history. Anyway, so if you want enlightenment or whatever you want, give it away. And
you said something about that dumb song. One is the
one is the loneliest number. That's such a dumb song.
Bullshit.
That's dumb. That's one is unity. It's all the numbers. It's like, goodness gracious, all the numbers. So it's exactly the opposite. One is not the loneliest number. It's
the only number that has everything.
It's the only number that has everything in it. So that's my Halloween message. You're still one with all your beloved people, and I'm still one with everyone.
And you've got a lot of them back there.
Well,
your relatives. Wow.
Well, everybody has lots of dead relatives.
Not like everybody else. You've got a lot of. You've got ancestors.
I am claiming people. I just found there was this Polish woman that Steve Abbott wrote us about. Anyway, I'm pretending she's one of my relatives now because she's so cool. Anyway. So anyway, have a happy Halloween, and remember your relatives, and that all that love never dies, no matter what. So.
Well, thank you, dear.
Now I'm going to go.
Get us those little coconut things to try to cheer us up today.
I'm not really depressed, actually, at this moment. I am missing people, but I'm not depressed about it. And I don't just mean dead people. I mean lots of live people.
Well, thank you, dear. I'm going to turn the camera back so I don't, because you don't like me to show you sliding out of the car.
It's not. It's stupid.
Oh, well, here I am. And I'm going to, I don't know if anyone...
Still listening after that.
Anybody there?
Oh, God. Every week I say after I talk, I'm not going to ever talk again. And then I do it again. It only takes me a week to get over it.
Okay. Well, I see people wandering around in costumes. Or is it just Sacramento wear?
Don't say that.
Well,
bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Okay. Now I know I've shared this with you before, maybe over the last 3 years. I've been doing this for 3 years now, guys. But to tell you the truth, and I mean this sincerely, there is very, very few things. You know, when you write something, or when you write a song, or when you write a book, or when you write an essay, it's really normal to be completely dissatisfied with what you're writing, and it's almost like when you first hear your own voice on a tape recorder, you go, "Who that? That's not me. I don't sound like that. I sound like Anthony Hopkins, or I don't that." When I first heard my voice, I said, "Boy, you sound like a cowboy mouse," and so you're embarrassed. Okay, you write something, and you know it's not as good as you can write, and you know that it could be more perfect, and you know you could have conveyed your thoughts better. So almost everything is sort of an embarrassment. Charles Bronson, okay, the movie star, Charles Bronson, wonderful guy. I think he's Tartar or some kind of Russian, but I love his movies, okay, because he always plays Charles Bronson, no matter what his character is. He would never go to his own movies. He would never see the screenings. He would just do it and go, oh, it gives me the creeps to watch myself. Well, that's how most every writer feels about their work. And there's very few things that I would, if someone would ask me, what's the one snippet, what's the one piece of writing that you'd be proud that people still read after you're dead. It's this particular thing, and it's my introduction to the Weiser Book of Horror and the Occult, and it's something that I help curate, and officially, I guess I'm the editor of it. And I wrote an introduction, and I don't know what got into me when I wrote the introduction, but and I'm not going to read the whole introduction to you this morning, but I am going to read part of it that I feel is very appropriate for Halloween. And I've done it before, and I apologize if I'm making you sit through this for the second or third time in 3 years, but it is Halloween. So here it is. Horror takes its time. And I have an epigraph by H.P. Lovecraft and George Martin from the Game of Thrones. But I'll just read the Lovecraft one. The oldest and strongest emotion of mankind is fear, and the oldest and strongest kind of fear is fear of the unknown. These facts few psychologists will dispute, and their admitted truth must establish for all time the genuineness and dignity of the weirdly horrible tale as a literary form. H.P. Lovecraft. Horror is the literature of the damned, a demon child art form conceived in the fertile depths of subconscious hell, gestated in the lonely womb of fear and despair, brought to troubled birth by the midwife of tortured obsessions, and reared to grotesque maturity in the prison asylum of a terrified imagination. Horror, to be truly horror, must be more than a frightening story. It must be a cloistered odyssey, a claustrophobic dance with madness. Above all, horror must be a traumatic and soul-mutating spiritual experience, sublime, elegant, and terrible. Sounds disturbing, doesn't it? I hope so. Horror should be disturbing. But at first glance, classic horror seldom presents itself as a product of a disturbed mind. On the contrary, some of the best works of the genre are introduced by the narrator, who seems as sane and rational as you or I. An ordinary mind, which at the moment is merely grappling with extraordinary psychological issues which we all can more or less identify. But beware, dear reader, your gentle empathy with the story's protagonist is a subtle poison that within a breathtakingly few paragraphs disrobes your soul and lulls you into a poppied sleep. Naked and vulnerable, and now uncertain of your own sanity, horror draws you irresistibly into the mind of the main character of a nightmare. For me, or anyone else who stubbornly refuses to grow up completely, literature doesn't get better than that. I turned 9 years old in July of 1957, and was enduring my second melancholy summer of exile in the uncivilized wilderness of Nebraska. Now, I have footnotes here where I apologize to Nebraskans, letting them know that I was giving voice to my younger Lon, and that I love many Nebraskans and do have good thoughts about Nebraska too. But I digress. I turned 9 years old in July of 1957 and was enduring my second melancholy summer of exile in the uncivilized wilderness of Nebraska. I realize the word exile probably sounds melodramatic, but I was a very melodramatic child in 1957. Nebraska was for me an alien planet, cruel and hostile. I hadn't been born in Nebraska. I'd been kidnapped by my own parents and taken there against my will. I was a Southern California boy. I thoroughly enjoyed my first 7 years in that hip and sunny fairyland where movies were made and where rock and roll was evolving, and the dreams and industries of the space age made us all feel like citizens of a bright and gleaming future. The family's move to Nebraska in 1955 was, in my eyes, a doleful exodus back to the dark ages, a trail of tears from 20th century beach paradise to a 19th century prairie hell. Powerless to change my circumstances, I pouted and steeped in a bitter broth of self-absorbed disappointment. I hated Nebraska. I hated Nebraskans. I hated the way they talked. I hated the way they laughed about butchering animals. I hated the way they preached about their wrathful God, a God who hates Negroes and Chinese, even though there wasn't a Negro or Chinese person within 100 miles of our provincial town. A God who would condemn little boys to the flames of eternal torment just for the sin of not believing in a God who hates Negroes and Chinese. Most of all, I hated the way Nebraskans, young and old, actually took smug pride in their own lack of sophistication. They wore their ingenuousness like a badge of honor and rudely ridiculed and bullied anyone who did not also proudly clothe themselves with the same coarse robe of premeditated ignorance. I admit this must sound terribly unkind. Hate is a strong and unhealthy passion, especially for a 9-year-old boy. But hate springs from fear, real or imagined, and in my young mind there was much to fear in Nebraska. Even as a youngster, I sensed a palpable darkness, a prairie madness, a nameless evil brooding just beneath the surface of the bib overalls and the cotton house dresses, a slumbering beast just waiting to be awakened by the kiss of alcohol or jealousy or greed or lust, an evil that is ever mindful that the nearest policeman is many miles, perhaps hours away. A black and primitive wickedness that takes poisonous root in the solitary psyche of those who toil alone in the earth from dawn to dusk, season after season, year after year. An evil that smothers in the heart all breath of human compassion or empathy for the pain and terror they inflict daily on the helpless beasts they breed for slaughter, or the children they breed for labor and war. A twisted and perverse evil that feeds on guilt and self-loathing, an evil that incubates in the deafening silence of sweltering summer nights, or the perpetual darkness of winter, and hideously hatches like a basilisk egg into a monstrous act of rape or incest and murder and suicide. The houses themselves are possessed of a dark subconscious secret. Indeed, they're built upon them. Unlike the sunny, uninsulated bungalows of Southern California, Nebraska houses hide their own dungeons. Large as the footprint of the house itself, these cinder block chambers, the natives call them basements, offer a modicum of insulation from the frozen sod of winter and an area of damp coolness from the blistering heat of summer. Basements also provide residents a dark hole in the ground in which to cower from the whirling death clouds called tornadoes, tangible wind devils that regularly strike down from pus-green clouds and sweep across the earth, bringing grotesque death and destruction to anything and anyone in their path. Yes, there was much for a young man to fear in Nebraska. I was lonely, depressed, and morose. One sweltering, humid summer morning, I became so desperately bored, I did something unthinkable for a 9-year-old boy in Nebraska. I found something to read. That morning I lingered in my sweat-soaked bed until I knew I was alone in the house. I got up and turned on our old Raytheon television set in the living room, but could only get a scattered signal of a farm report. Like electricity and indoor toilets, television was new to rural Nebraska, and the few broadcast stations in operation were very far away. Reluctantly, I switched off the crackling television and turned my attention to the living room bookcase. I looked for something, anything that might alleviate my ennui or titillate my idle brain. The family library had a few things that might distract me. My father was a pretty interesting guy, a native Californian and very un-Nebraskan. He valued education and wanted his sons to cherish books. So he recently purchased a new set of World Book encyclopedias to display next to a few old sets of matched volumes of literature. I figured the encyclopedia would be too much like homework, so I turned my attention to an old 20-volume set of the world's greatest literature. I'll digress for a second. If you're a parent, do you have something like that in your house? Just asking. At first glance, The Last of the Mohegans looked like it might be fun, but I soon discovered it much too grown up and difficult. I finally settled on Volume 8 of the series Tales of Mystery and Imagination by Edgar Allan Poe. I opened it up and saw to my delight that it was a collection of short stories with titles that were absolutely irresistible to a miserable 9-year-old boy. The Premature Burial, The Mask of the Red Death, The Telltale Heart, and so on. Premature burials and Red Death sounded very promising indeed. But back in California, I had actually seen a terrifying cartoon called The Telltale Heart at the old Lakewood Theater. I recall that my mother became very upset with my brother Mark for taking little Lonnie to see such an adult and disturbing film. I poured myself a glass of buttermilk. Yeah, I actually liked buttermilk as a kid. I poured myself a glass of buttermilk, plopped down on the big chair by the open window, and opened the book. Once I started to read, however, I knew I was way out of my depth. There were lots of big words, incomprehensible foreign language phrases and epigraphs, and the geographic references. Every other sentence seemed to make reference to some ancient legend or myth or classic poem. I was forced to actually use the dictionary and the encyclopedia just to plod my way through the first story, The Pit and the Pendulum. But I eventually did get through it, and after I closed the book, I had realized I had become somebody else. Someone I liked, who could use the dictionary and the encyclopedia. I learned about the horrors of the Spanish Inquisition. How delightfully evil was that? I was exposed for the first time to the melodically elegant use of the English language. Most importantly, I discovered I was capable of being touched by art. Capable of being possessed by passion. My ennui lifted and was replaced by a pre-adolescent worship of the macabre and the genius and wit of its creators. This passion has yet to subside. I spent the rest of that summer with Poe and a dictionary and the World Book Encyclopedia. Ironically, the same 19th century-esque liabilities I despised about 1950s Nebraska life proved to be priceless assets of atmosphere that allowed me to conjure the perfect reading environment to savor the ecstasy of classic horror. Horror takes its time. And to properly appreciate it, you must also take your time. It has a pace, a slow, incessant rhythm like your own heartbeat or your own breath. After all, the great innovators of the art were writers of the Gilded Age who wrote for 19th and early 20th century audiences. Nebraska in 1957 had both her feet planted firmly in the 19th and early 20th centuries. That summer morning in 1957 could have just as easily been 1857, accompanied by the same soundtrack of bucolic silence, the same light searing through the same sun-stained yellow window shades. No hint of modern objective reality. No diversions of bustling civilizations. No diversions of airplanes roaring overhead. No freeways in the distance. No sirens, no television, no radio, no air conditioner. Only the white noise of a million cicadas and the hiss of my own blood running through my brain. The incessant swing of the pendulum of an ancient clock, the barking of a distant dog, the cawing of a crow, the almost imperceptible whisper of the delicate film of curtains as they billowed gently toward me like the gossamer negligee of a love-sick ghost. This was the background music of my honeymoon with horror. Plain as the honey-sweet words of Edgar Allan Poe, lugubriously woven elegant phrases from the age of gilded manners into a symphony of tortured rapture. Only had I been obliged to read the yellowing pages by the light of a whale oil lamp, could my anachronistic reading experience have been more exquisitely atmospheric. I was so lucky. Today I find it almost impossible to recapture the sepia-toned world that best conducts horror from the page to the soul. 21st century readers, spoiled by spectacular special effects of the cinema, demand instant gratification from the written word, explosive shocks and gore-splattered attacks upon the senses. We no longer allow ourselves time to refine the rapture of terror. We wolf down the junk food snacks of violence and carnage when, with just a little patience, we could leisurely savor a rich and soul-satisfying banquet of elegant horror. We're missing so much. That summer with Poe and my newly awakened love for the written word would eventually have profound effects upon my life. The most obvious being my eventual career as a writer. Writing is not only what I do for a living, it is my art, my joy, my voice, my meditation, my prayer, my confession, my declaration of independence, my act of worship, my song of awareness. My profession, however, has taken many years to evolve and develop. My 1957 boyhood love affair with horror had more immediate and dramatic consequences. Simply put, I woke up. Poe's narrative voice clearly revealed to me that I possessed my own narrative voice. That hot summer morning, my consciousness instantly expanded. I no longer just passively saw or heard or smelled or felt things around me. I woke up and became consciously aware I was seeing and hearing and smelling and feeling the things around me. I became at once the observer and the observed of my own movie. And like the voiceover narration in film noir detective stories, I began to tell myself the bedtime story of my own existence. And the narration continues to this moment. Thank you, Edgar Allan Poe. Thank you, horror literature. Happy Halloween, everyone.